Fair warning, there is nothing about these games that I'm not going to lay bare, which includes Breath of the Wild and Persona 5 Royal. Persona 5 Strikers was announced at the Persona concert in April 2019 alongside Persona 5 Royal. Initially christened Persona 5 Scramble: The Phantom Strikers, it was a collaboration between Atlus and their Persona series and Koei Tecmo and their Dynasty Warriors series, putting the former's characters into the latter's gameplay. Though initially it did not have a release date window, the game would come out in early 2020 in its native Japan, but for quite some time after that it did not have a release date for the rest of the world. While the West waited for more news, out of left field in September 2020, Koei Tecmo announced another Dynasty Warriors spin-off, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, a successor not only to the Hyrule Warriors for the Wii U, but a canon prequel to Breath of the Wild. Age of Calamity would be released that November, while Persona 5 Strikers would be released outside of Japan the following February. Both of these games are simultaneously beloved and controversial, and I thought they'd make a good compare and contrast study. Age of Calamity is the second game, or fourth if you want to get technical, of the Hyrule Warriors sub-franchise, following Hyrule Warriors for the Wii U from 2014 and its expansions on the 3DS and Switch in 2016 and 2018 respectively. Strictly speaking related, it also learns a lot of lessons from Fire Emblem Warriors from 2017. Persona 5 Strikers is the first of its ilk, although you could perhaps draw a line between it and the fighting game spin-offs that Persona 4 had. I do believe that among the many other Dynasty Warriors spin-offs of other franchises, only these two are canon. Breath of the Wild and Persona 5 are two very different games. Breath of the Wild is a massive open-world adventure with its primary focus being exploration and puzzle solving. Persona 5 is a turn-based RPG with no puzzle to its combat system, just a system of elemental weaknesses, and yet somehow a hack-and-slash spin-off fits each game perfectly. The first and perhaps most laudable thing about both of these games is just how much they feel like their base games. Yeah, both games had people from the original teams working on them, and they got to use some of the original games as assets, like typefaces and images and stuff, but the dedication is impressive. At times you can barely tell you're playing a different game. Age of Calamity begins with a baby guardian named Teriko awakening during the Great Calamity. Moved by Zelda's powers awakening, he creates a portal to go back in time to before the Calamity, but a little bit of Calamity Ganon malice sneaks in with him. He joins up with Zelda and Impa and Link as they get an order from King Roam to get pilots for the Divine Beasts. Zora Princess Mipha for Va Ruda, Goron Strongman Daruk for Va Rudania, Rito Marksman Revali for Va Mato, and Gerudo Chieftain Urbosa for Va Naboris. Zelda tries to awaken her powers, the gang spars with the Yiga clan and their leader Master Koga, his right-hand Suga, and their Prophet of Doom Astor, and Sheikah researchers Robbie and Purah study Teriko. The Calamity arrives before Zelda can awaken her powers, and King Yi sacrifices himself so Link, Zelda, Impa, and Teriko can escape. Ganon possesses the Divine Beasts, and it looks like the champions are about to die, but then the new champions from the time of Breath of the Wild show up from some Teriko time portals to help them. Sidon of the Zora, Yunobo of the Gorons, Teba of the Rito, and Riju of the Gerudo, alongside Patricia the Sandseal, who is the best. Astor backstabs the Yiga clan, and Suga is last seen defending Koga against a hollow, and Koga takes the surviving Yiga and joins Zelda's side. Astor revives the Blight Ganons again, and Link's about to fall fighting the four of them at once, but her desire to protect him awakens Zelda's powers. Zelda finds out her dad's still alive. He was able to protect himself with his guardian shield that he took from Teriko, and they have a heart-to-heart. Zelda then leads a force comprised of all the peoples of Hyrule to take back the castle from Calamity Ganon. But Astor's got one last ace up his sleeve, a Teriko from the bad timeline, infested with malice, Harbinger Ganon. Harbinger Ganon absorbs Astor into himself and becomes the anthropomorphic personification of Calamity Ganon. Malice corrupts Teriko and the party has to fight him, knocking the evil out of him but unfortunately killing him in the process. As he dies, he plays a snippet of Zelda's lullaby, stirring a memory in Zelda that she built Teriko as a child with her late mother. Before he breaks for good, Teriko gets one last good shot at Ganon. Link defeats him and Zelda seals him away forever and ever until you lock him as a playable character in the postgame. Their job done, Sidon, Yunoba, Teba, Riju, and Patricia return to their time, and Zelda gets the idea to rebuild Teriko, which, once you get all the parts you need, Robbie and Purah successfully repair him and everyone is happy. Unlike Persona 5 Strikers, Age of Calamity drip feeds you new characters. You start off with just Link and his one-handed weapons, although you can unlock the two-handed weapon and spear movesets as soon as you find them in levels, which can happen very early, along with Impa and Sheikah Slade Zelda. The rest of the campaign sees you gaining the champions in whichever order you choose, Daruk, Mipha, Revali, and Urbosa, Hestu the Korok Seed Guy, the four new champions Yunobo, Sidon, Teba, and Riju, and later in the main story, Master Koga, King Roam, and Bow of Light Zelda. Optional during the main story story are the Great Fairies and Monk Maz Koshia, and in the post-game you can defeat a certain set of missions to unlock Terrico, and after basically beating everything else in the game, you can unlock the battles to unlock Calamity Ganon. Compared to P5S, Age of Calamity is fairly traditional as a Warriors game. There are 4 digits worth of enemies on the map at any given time, there's ordering your allies around the battlefield, there's collecting stuff, infusing weapons, same stuff different day. It does, however, improve more than a little from its predecessor. Remember that one episode of The Office where Michael ordered the wrong pizza and he asked the rest of the office whether you could have all you can eat of pretty good pizza or a medium amount of great pizza? Hyrule Warriors 1, especially Definitive Edition, is all you can eat of pretty good pizza, and Age of Calamity is a medium amount of great pizza. Hyrule Warriors 1 was fun. It was great having all the different characters, and especially in the definitive version on the Switch, there was a hell of a lot of content. But the characters weren't that well balanced. You had characters like Twilight Midna, who could obliterate armies with her eyes closed, while Ruto struggled to kill a single Dynalfos. Here, although we still have something of joke characters in the form of Hestu, Master Koga, and the Great Fairies, none of them are terrible in a fight in the way that the worst of HW1 was. Some of them are unusual to get used to, especially the aforementioned Great Fairies, but even the weird ones are still a lot more effective than Hyrule Warriors 1's weird ones like Fi or Tingle or the aforementioned Ruto. Of the cast, I probably spent the most time with Master Sword Link, Impa, Rivali, Mipha, and Teba, who is basically a walking, talking death machine. Link is down to only 3 movesets from the 6 in Hyrule Warriors 1. When you think about it, Link really only had 3 types of melee weapons in Breath of the Wild, solely basing it around his animations. One-handed weapons, two-handed weapons, and spears. Even some of the weapons that were visually distinctive and or had other unique properties still used one of those animations, like axes were still swung like two-handed swords, boomerangs were still swung like one-handed swords, as were rods, although they've been split off into their own thing independent from Link here. Zelda is, as of right now, the only other one with multiple movesets. The Sheikah Slate one she starts off with, and her Bow of Light she gains later. For the record, her outfits are not tied to her weapons, so you can say have Yoga Pants Zelda with the Bow of Light or White Dress Zelda with the Sheikah Slate. There's absolutely no weapon durability system in this game, by the way. It works 100% on Warriors weapon rules. This game does keep Breath of the Wild's elemental system, though, although every character now has usage of the rods as a metered resource, and no one has an elemental weapon like, say, the Flame Sword in the original game. Fire is strong against ice, and vice versa, though neither are one-hit kills anymore, and lightning is still super effective if the enemies are standing in water, or it's raining, or they are water-like Ganon. Speaking of elemental weaknesses, there are now fire, ice, and lightning versions of the game's stronger enemies, along with malice-covered versions. The Sheikah runes are also usable by every character, with each one having a different take on the rune, as well as being worked into Zelda's Sheikah Slate moveset. Enemies now have attacks that are directly countered by using a rune. Expect to throw a lot of bombs onto Hinox's crotches. The NPC AI is not great, but it's not as bad as Hyrule Warriors 1. In that game, all ordering someone around would accomplish was getting them from point A to point B. If you wanted literally anything done, you'd have to do it yourself. But I might be a little spoiled by the NPC AI in Fire Emblem Warriors. If you ordered, say, Cordelia to take a keep while you, let's say Ryoma, were off fighting a boss on the other side of the map, Cordelia would take that keep. Here, they aren't miracle workers like they are in Fire Emblem Warriors, but they're at least better at holding the line than in the first game. If I send someone to defend the allied base, I can at least count on that buying a little bit more time before defeat. But if I send someone else to defeat a boss or take a keep without me, not much will get done. At least the boss might have lost a little bit of health, or the keep might have lost a little bit of strength, which is more than I can say for the HW1 allies. They're also a lot better than the first game at not getting hurt while I send them off to somewhere else. But once they've gotten a taste of the glorious killing machines that are the Fire Emblem Warriors allies, it's hard to ever look back. Divine Beast battles! Woo! They're here. To be fair, they are pretty awesome. It's awesome to see them in action, stomping on bokoblins and shooting their big old lasers at stuff besides Ganon, and I admit I probably would have been a bit disappointed if this game didn't give them anything cool to do. But they do wear out their welcome pretty fast, and they absolutely melt their health away, and most annoyingly is they get absolutely no materials for all their blasting. The only materials they gain are the victory rewards that you only get after the first win anyway. I kinda hope they change that in a patch when the DLC comes, along with having them die not so quickly. Unlike Warriors games past, including Hyrule Warriors 1, Age of Calamity does not have materials tied to the main characters, so on the bright side this means no more grinding against bosses. Like, say, fighting a dozen younglings because you need one more Keaton mask, but this also means that any battle where you're mostly fighting named characters, or for that matter, any of the training type battles where the grunt level enemies are Hylian soldiers or Rito or Gerudo or something like that, you won't get any special trophies. Neither do the Blight Ganons or any of the final bosses for that matter. There's also no ranking system in this game, so you can take as much damage as you want. Unlike in Hyrule Warriors 1, the timer now stops whenever a character is doing their big fancy attack like their special or a weak point smash, which is a godsend, especially for Calamity Ganon, whose special attacks take forever. For the record, the same thing happens in P5S, but since all the time challenges there are just hold out to the end challenges, it really adds nothing there. Finding Koroks is back. There are way less than like 1,000 of them, or however many there were in Breath of the Wild, but unfortunately the game requires a way higher percentage of them to finish all the quests. You only need like half the Koroks to get all the weapon upgrades in Breath of the Wild. I think I have about half of them in Age of Calamity, and I'm not close to the last quest. The voice acting was better here than in Breath of the Wild. I don't know if they've actually gotten better, or if it's just that there's more of it and it feels less jarring when it comes up, but yeah, it was better. There is amiibo support, but they'll just get you stuff like crafting materials and some weapons. Legend of Zelda amiibos will favor that character's weapons, like say scanning the Mipha amiibo will give you Mipha weapons, but any amiibo will work for this. Also, I have pre-ordered Age of Calamity's DLC, though as of right now the 2 waves aren't out yet. Link's new costume exists, his new sword also exists. I haven't played around with it or particularly looked into its stats, but it's one of the weapons you can buy from Robbie in the Akala Tech Lab. And I think that we've already basically confirmed that Robbie and probably Purah are going to be promoted to playable. I'm assuming this first wave, Pulse of the Ancients, is probably going to be heavily focused on them and their other ancient technology stuff. Guardian of Remembrance is probably referring to Terrico, so I imagine it'll probably be more about his story. So I dragged my feet a lot, and now the first wave of DLC is out. No Robbie or Purah like I was expecting, but I do like the new weapons. I wonder if Flail Link is a teaser for whip-type weapons being added into Breath of the Wild 2, and Zelda on the bike was a cool swerve, and I'm down for it. While playing as a big Guardian is cool, the novelty is somewhat worn down by Terrico also using Guardian moves, and I think if we had to get a boss, I would have rather had a Lionel. Compared to its immediate predecessor and its cousin from another series, Age of Calamity is by far the best in its series, but how does it compare to? It's the summer after Persona 5, and the Phantom Thieves are reuniting for a summer road trip across Japan. Unfortunately for their plans, the cognitive world is back with a new coat of paint. See, there's this new smart assistant application named Emma that's all the rage right now, and this kooky fashion designer lady named Alice Hiragi is using it to friend people and then steal their desires in the cognitive world, turning them into her mindless drones. This new, twisted version of Tokyo Alice created is called a jail, and Alice is its monarch. While trapped in the Shibuya jail, Joker, Ryuji, and Morgana run into this humanoid AI named Sophia, who is in some sort of stasis in a dumpster and has a persona of her own, Pythos, though it doesn't seem to work quite the same as the others, and it doesn't have an arcana. Sophia, who outside of the cognitive world is stuck in Joker's phone, becomes the group's new assistant as the Phantom Thieves reunite to take on the jails. The police are actively looking into this change of heart problem, led by Inspector Zenkichi Hasegawa, who approaches the Phantom Thieves, at the time the main culprits, with something of a bargain to share their findings with each other. As the Phantom Thieves fight their way across the Shibuya jail, they get a more detailed portrait of Alice. Unlike the monolithically evil rulers of palaces of the past, Alice is only stealing people's desires because she wants to be loved, because she was bullied for her eccentricities in high school, and they realize that being a jail monarch is trapping her into her traumas. After saving Alice, Zenkichi sends them on a northward journey, and the Phantom Thieves decide to go use as an excuse to go on the vacation they've been talking about. They stop by Sendai, take care of a jail there, led by egotistical novelist Ango Natsume, and meet Emma's creator, Kuon Ichinose, and we learn that she sold Emma to a tech company called Medice, who is led by a dude named Akira Konoe, who is in turn supported by Jun Iwata, a corrupt politician who was once part of Shido's group of lackeys. The Phantom Thieves and Zenkichi travel to Sapporo and deal with their jail's monarch, Mariko Hyoda, who was basically Haru's surrogate mother when she was a girl. The Phantom Thieves bond with Zenkichi and his daughter Akane, who's a big fan of the Phantom Thieves. They then travel to Okinawa, where a Medice research facility is located, only to find out that the monarch there is already dead. He jumped off a cliff to avoid being trapped by his traumas the way Alice, Natsume, and Hyodo were. After Okinawa, the group decides to target Konoe, which puts them in his crosshairs. Konoe uses his influence to get an arrest warrant out for the thieves, and Zenkichi sends them a warning to help them escape at the cost of him getting arrested for interference. The thieves receive a message that Akane has been kidnapped, only to find out once they get there that Akane has been made into a jail monarch herself, because you see, 2 years ago her mom was killed by Iwata while he was drunk driving, and he pinned the blame on his secretary, so the case was closed. Akane knew it was Iwata and didn't like this one bit and blamed her policeman dad for not following the case further, so she grew to hate the police and idolize the phantom thieves. All the thieves but Futaba get captured, and meanwhile Zenkichi gets sprung from jail by Sai, who Makoto had called in for help. Brings Zenkichi to Shadow Akane, who berates him for not throwing the book at Iwata. Zenkichi reveals that Iwata made a threat against Akane's life should he continue looking into his wife's murder, so he couldn't really go after Iwata, even though he really wanted to. His desire to protect Akane awakens his persona, Valjean of the Apostle Arcana, which he uses to then free the rest of the thieves, and is formally inducted into their ranks. They then change Akane's heart, then the group, now 10 members strong, heads to Osaka to change Konoe's heart, which they do, and he decides to disband Medise and shut down Emma. But the latter doesn't happen, and instead a new jail is formed, ruled by Ichinose. See, she didn't totally relinquish the rights to Emma like she said she did. She's trying to create a world free of evil, so she gave Emma to Medise so she could reach a wider audience, control their free will, and create a perfect world. Emma is the false god Demiurge, but she wasn't Ichinose's first swing at it. That was Sophia. Sophia got a little bit too altruistic for Ichinose liking, so she discarded her, hence why the Phantom Thieves found her in a dumpster. Ichinose commands Sophia to attack the thieves, but she decides to rebel, awakening her true persona, Pandora of the Hope Arcana. They defeat Ichinose and she helps Futaba hack into Emma, and the gang defeats it, and Emma is finally shut down for good, taking the jails with her. Also, the gang didn't ever fight Iwata, but he did end up arrested because Konoe testified against him. The Phantom Thieves head their separate ways once again, Zenkichi returned to Kyoto with Akane, and Sophia going on a journey with Ichinose so they can both grow. The rest of the Phantom Thieves also part ways, with promises that they'll meet again soon. After the tutorial, you were given free reign to use all of the original Phantom Thieves, which is to say Joker, Ryuji, Morgana, An, Yusuke, Makoto, and Haru. Futaba isn't technically playable, but she does stick around as the group's navigator, and new character Sophia joins the party immediately as well. You only gain one more party member after the beginning, Zenkichi, who joins during the 5th jail. Each one not only has a unique element, but they play very differently from each other, although perhaps not as differently as the characters in Age of Calamity do. Jails replace palaces and mementos in this game. They take a little from both of them. They are the primary dungeons of this game, like palaces, but in a dramatic shift from them, they don't disappear when you defeat its boss. All of the requests you get in the game occur in these jails, taking that aspect from mementos. They are much more open air than either of their predecessors, having a lot more wide open spaces as opposed to palaces, which were entirely indoors, and mementos, which was bound to its subway map pattern. Honestly, this entire game feels like Persona 5 until the moment you unmask a shadow, and even when it slips into the Warriors style combat, it doesn't force itself into a lot of the Warriors mold. There's probably a reason this one's not called Persona 5 Warriors. There is no kill counter. You don't order the other thieves around parts of the battlefield. The relatively fast-charging special attacks of other Warriors games are replaced by the much slower-charging Showtime attacks, which are basically a single-character version of the attacks of the same name in Royal. The only things vaguely resembling materials are the additional masks for Joker and the cooking ingredients. A couple of plot-relevant locations are called keeps for posterity's sake, but you don't have to defeat a certain number inside of them. You don't even fight in the keeps proper. In addition to roaming across the large open areas and fighting shadows, there are some puzzles, some 2D platforming challenges, and some sequences where Futaba has to hack a terminal and you have to protect her while she's doing it. Also, I've never been to Japan, so I can't appreciate how closely or not closely these jails mirror the cities they're based on, but even just with regards to the in-game version of the cities you see, it's cool to compare and contrast the real pleasant cities with their twisted counterparts in the jails. I was also a little worried the jails wouldn't have as much of a distinctive visual identity as the palaces, but I really do think they did a good job of making each one distinctive, except for Jail of the Abyss, which was a bit too mementos-y. There is no confidant system in this game. It's replaced by the bond system, which represents Joker's bond with the rest of the Phantom Thieves as a group. Replacing the bonuses you'd get from fusing a persona of an arcana you had a strong bond with, you now gain points every time you level up your bond that can be used to buy stuff like permanent stat buffs, increasing the potency of healing items, increasing the likelihood of finding treasure demons, and stuff like that. Personally, my buff of choice would be Oracle Recovery, wherein Futaba heals your HP and SP after every battle, which is really needed on longer dungeons. Also, the way you extend your character's moveset is by unlocking Master Arts instead of completing quests. Although each character still has a gun, you can't buy upgrades to them in this game as you could in P5. You can buy upgrades for the melee weapons, but not the guns. You can upgrade the group's ammo with a bond skill, but that's it. Persona's system of elemental attacks and weaknesses is carried over into this game. Every Persona specializes in one of the 8 elements, or almighty, or physical, or healing, or support skills. And they use these elements not only in the SP draining Persona skills, but also in their actual moveset in a way that doesn't drain SP. For instance, Joker's C4 will utilize a skill from his Persona's chosen element without consuming SP, and An and Makoto's C1 add their element, fire and nuclear respectively, to their default attack strings. All the physical skills, the ones that drain HP as opposed to SP in the original, now work on a system where they gradually heal their HP cost back, so long as the user doesn't receive damage during the time it takes to refill. Joker still has a reasonably diverse set of personas he can use, although now they're gained as random drops instead of through bargaining. The Velvet Room and its services also make a return, and Lavenza, running the Velvet Room while Igor is on vacation or something, can still create new personas for you. As previously mentioned, the Arcana Confidant system does not make a return, so here the Arcanas are solely for aesthetics and tradition. Despite the freedom to switch around Joker's personas as you please, he is still somewhat cornered into the Curse Specialist role, as that's the only element that doesn't otherwise have a specialist, Zenkichi specializes in the Almighty element. This unfortunately means Joker's either gotta stick with Arsene or some other persona that specializes in Curse, or you'll be missing out on potentially hitting some enemies' weaknesses by being down an element. Unlike Age of Calamity and the other Warriors games I've played, the way this game is structured, I didn't really pick a main out of the Phantom Thieves. In fact, I played all of them about equally. Admittedly, this was also kinda how I played Persona 5. I just kinda focused on whoever had the element I needed for a specific dungeon. If a lot of enemies in a dungeon were weak to ice, for instance, I'd bring Yusuke along, and the same thing happened here. Also, even within a single battle, your other party members will ask you if they can use a skill or do a one more attack, and once you baton pass to them and let them do their thing, you keep on them, and I just kinda rolled with the flow, switching heroes as the game suggested. If I had to pick a favorite to play as, again, tough call, but I think An's my favorite for her moveset, but I also love Morgana because he makes adorable cartoon sound effects whenever he jumps, and in general, he is a cute kitty. You do have to keep Joker in your party at all times, but the game doesn't end immediately if he falls in battle, only when the entire party of 4 falls, or Futaba in the sequences where she's hacking a terminal on the battlefield and you have to protect her. Also, don't forget you can heal Futaba from the pause menu during her hacking sequences, and the upgraded personas don't appear at all in this game, by the way. Everyone sticks to their defaults the whole game. There is a day system in this game, although it's really completely ornamental. In real Persona 5, leaving a dungeon early would cause the days to move forward, and if you leave a dungeon without getting enough done, you've essentially wasted a precious time slot. Here, you can leave and come back as many times as you want without the day skipping forward. Not only can you complete every dungeon in one day, you kind of have to complete every dungeon in one day. Also, there's no day-related defeat conditions in this game. Lastly, there was no DLC for this game, aside from a little bit of music, even though people actually kind of wanted DLC. You see, this game and Persona 5 Royal were made at the same time, so there's nothing from Royal in Strikers except, again, the music. People actually really wanted DLC to add Akechi and Sumire, but alas, it seems like it's not meant to be. I've been refraining from critiquing the stories up to this point. As I mentioned before, both of these games' stories are somewhat controversial. We need to discuss the Varuda in the room for Age of Calamity, the alternate timeline story where the new champions save the old champions and the calamity is averted. This is a really polarizing aspect of the game. A lot of people loathe it. A lot of people think that having the calamity averted ruins the game and we were robbed of a tragedy where the forces of good lose. On the other hand, I've heard people say that they didn't want to pick up the game because they didn't want to play a game where it was written in the stars that you lose and only got interested when the more optimistic ending was revealed. Seemingly missing from the conversation is the camp of seeing the original ending would have been nice, but I understand why they did it the way they did. Guess which camp I'm in. Look, I get it. I like a dramatic tragedy as much as the next guy, but I get why they didn't want to make a game where you march the champions into their graves. One of the really late post-game missions is the Siege of Fort Hattano. An army of monsters and guardians has appeared at Fort Hattano. Defeat the assembled enemies before the area is left in ruins. In Breath of the Wild, Fort Hattano is ruins. There's one wall covered in guardian skeletons and a field full of dozens more. All the NPCs you find around it treat it as a place of reverence. Lots of people died there. A lot of people think Link died there. Do you really want to play a game where the fate has already been sealed that you lose? If this was a movie, I'd totally agree that this was a cop-out. but here I kinda think that changing the story was a necessary sacrifice for the sake of gameplay. Also, you guys just didn't want to admit that the Rito threw a party after Rivali died, right? The goodbye jerk bird party? If there's one really nice thing I can say about Age of Calamity, it's that it really felt like the original characters weren't hogging the spotlight. Yeah, Terrico's important, but it didn't really feel like he stole the spotlight away from Link and Zelda and crew. He felt like a part of the team, not the team. Hyrule Warriors 1 is really the Lana and Sia show, featuring Link and company. And Fire Emblem Warriors was the story of Rowan and Liana, although I understand that one a bit more, as essentially they were that game's Lord characters, and there's always a new Lord every game. Terrico's role in the plot is integral, but he's not the plot like Lana and Sia are. He's decidedly a support character to Zelda's arc, and I appreciate that a lot. Aesthetically at least, I like Astor a lot. He's Yiga aligned, but he's so different from the rest of them, and his dark prophet, evil astrologer angle makes him very different from the many other dark sorcerer types this series has to offer. Unfortunately, this is where my nice things to say about him end. He just kinda is in the game. We learn nearly nothing about him aside from the fact that he's evil and he's using the rest of the Yiga clan and that sort of jazz. I do hope that he gets some love in the DLC because he's got nada right now. Persona 5 Strikers' story isn't quite as controversial as Age of Calamities, but it's not without criticism. The biggest criticism I see is to whether or not it was a good idea to make the Ersatz palace rulers good guys. I actually think this was kind of a great idea. One of my biggest complaints about regular Persona 5 is that the game spends way too long explaining how our targets are evil and awful when most of the time their actions spoke for themselves. It was just a little too much time retreading the same ground. Don't get me wrong, the P5 Palace rulers were very effective villains, but given how severe their actions were, I'd say that they didn't really need to explain 1,000 times over how they were evil. And I like giving the Phantom Thieves a bit more moral complexity too. Persona 5 made a big deal about how changing hearts was kinda scary and easy to cross the line with, but aside from the Akechi subplot and that one bad ending, really what the non-Akechi Phantom Thieves were doing was 100% on the moral high ground because their targets couldn't be pursued by normal law and order. The Phantom Thieves couldn't make anyone confess to a crime they didn't commit, and unless they deliberately sabotage it like Akechi did, they couldn't kill their target. Here, their moral arguments have more weight because the palace rulers aren't the most morally reprehensible people in their stories. Alice had a complex about being loved because she was bullied in high school. Natsume's managers were exploiting his work and leading him on. Hyoto's underlings were taking bribes and leaving her to take the blame after a child died because of their incompetence. And later we learned that they were having their strings pulled by a greater conspiracy. The debates on how much they deserve to have their hearts changed is a real debate and not just a formality. Persona 5's style of villains have their appeal, but honestly I prefer the story here. In case you were wondering, you really don't have to play Breath of the Wild first to understand Age of Calamity. Even the stuff regarding Breath of the Wild's present, like who the new champions are, is explained well enough. Persona 5 Strikers is a little less forgiving. It doesn't go super deep into spoiler territory, like it doesn't mention what happened to Akechi and why he's not around anymore, but it does expect you to know who Shido is, Lavenza, as opposed to Caroline and Justine, runs the Velvet Room, the final boss's name is mentioned, although it doesn't go into depth, and it does talk about how Haru's father passed away recently, particularly in the Hyoto arc, although the details are spared from us. That said, at least it does not expect you to have played Royal. None of the Royal exclusive characters are even so much as mentioned, so I'd say that you don't have to have finished Persona 5 to understand this game, but you should probably at least start it first. At the end of the day, I'd recommend Persona 5 Strikers to anyone who can't get enough of Persona 5. There are other spin-offs like Persona Q2 and the dancing game spin-off, but Strikers is basically Persona 5.5, way more so than anything else. You don't need to be a Warriors fan to get a lot of enjoyment out of Persona 5 Strikers. In contrast, I'd say that Warriors fans will get a lot more enjoyment out of Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity than Breath of the Wild fans will, and I'm not just saying that because Age of Calamity quickly became the best-selling Warriors game ever and brought the franchise to the widest audience ever. Unless you were like me and didn't care that they threw Breath of the Wild's meager story in the garbage, there's a good chance that you'll get upset at this game erasing the tragic end of the champions. It also changes a lot more gameplay-wise. Yeah, the environments are lovingly recreated from Breath of the Wild, but you can't climb every wall or traverse every square of the map. But if you can get past the story and get behind the Warrior-style gameplay, Age of Calamity is a really fun experience. Last couple of notes. Interestingly, both games have a cooking system, which is weird because Persona 5 didn't really have a cooking system, just making coffee and curry with Sojiro that consumed time, not resources. Age of Calamity's cooking involves taking edible resources and turning them into dishes that grant you bonuses to your stats going into the next battle, and you have to decide whether to use your edible resources towards food or saving them for quests that might possibly require those same materials. Persona 5 Strikers sees you gathering ingredients that can be used only towards making food, as well as gathering recipes from all the towns that you visit. The food made here goes into your inventory as opposed to being buffs granted before a battle. Here you're making healing items to be used during jail exploration. King Roam's moveset is all about switching between his king and hermit disguises, even though I don't think at all during this timeline has he ever had to use the hermit disguise. Not even during the time frame where he's faking his death, which you'd think would be the perfect place to bring in the disguise, but they don't do it for some reason. The flowers that each of the great fairies put out during their unique action are also the flowers that surround their pods in Breath of the Wild. Like Terra, the white-haired one who lives in Gerudo Desert, has Saflina surrounding her pod in Breath of the Wild and uses Saflina in her unique action. That's a neat touch. Also, Thunderblight Ganon is so tiny! I didn't realize it was so tiny! It's almost precious. Lastly, Ryuji said fuck! He said it! He said the thing! Not only that, it's not just a throwaway swear. There's this one part of the game that I really don't want to spoil, but he gets an awesome speech and he gets to say fuck in it! The real Age of Calamity was the friends we made along the way!